Your mother lives, Saxon, he cried. Your mother lives, and her life is mine. You hear me, Saxon? He leered at me from inside his circle, and his ancient face was shadowed by the temple's twin fires, which gave his eyes a red, feral threat. You hear me? He cried again. Your mother's soul is mine. I coupled with her to make it so. I made the two-backed beast with her, and drew her blood to make her soul mine. Touch me, Saxon, and your mother's soul goes to the fire dragons. She will be crushed by the ground, burned by the air, choked by the water, and thrust into pain for evermore. And not just her soul, Saxon, but the soul of every living thing that ever slithered from her loins. I put her blood into the ground, Saxon, and slid my power into her belly. He laughed and raised his staff high towards the temple's beamed roof. Touch me, Saxon, and the curse will take her life, and through her life yours. He lowered the staff so it pointed at me again. But let me go, and you and she will live. I stopped at the circle's edge. The skulls did not make a ghost fence, but there was still a dreadful power in their array. I could feel that power like unseen wings battering great strokes to baffle me. Cross the skull circle, I thought, and I would enter the gods' playground, to contend against things I could not imagine, let alone understand. Tanabur saw my uncertainty and smiled in triumph. Your mother is mine, Saxon, he crooned. Made mine, all mine. Her blood and soul and body are mine, and that makes you mine, for you were born in blood and pain from my body. He moved his staff so that its moon-tip touched my breast. Shall I take you to her, Saxon? She knows you live, and a 2-day journey will bring you back to her. He smiled wickedly. You're mine, he cried. All mine. I am your mother and your father, your soul and your life. I made the charm of oneness on your mother's womb, and you are now my son. Ask her. He twitched his staff towards Nimue. She knows that charm. Nimue said nothing, but just stared balefully at Gundlius, while I looked into the druid's horrid eyes. I was frightened to cross his circle, terrified by his threats. But then, in a sickening rush, the events of that long-ago night came back to me as if they had happened just yesterday. I remembered my mother's cries, and I remembered her pleading with the soldiers to leave me at her side, and I remembered the spearmen laughing and striking her head with their spear-staves, and I remembered this cackling druid with the hairs and moons on his robe and the bones in his hair, and I remembered how he had lifted me and fondled me and said what a fine gift for the gods I would make. All that I remembered. Just as I remembered being lifted up, screaming for my mother who could not help me. And I remembered being carried through the twin lines of fire where the warriors danced and the women moaned. And I remembered Tanaburs holding me high above his tonsured head as he walked to the edge of a pit that was a black circle in the earth, surrounded by fires whose flames burned bright enough to illuminate the blood-smeared tip of a sharpened stake that protruded from the bowels of the round dark pit. The memories were like pain serpents biting at my soul, as I remembered the bloody scraps of flesh and skin hanging from the firelit stake, and the half-comprehended horror of the broken bodies that writhed in slow, pitiful agony as they died in the bloody darkness of this druid's death pit. And I remembered how I still screamed for my mother, as Tanaburs lifted me to the stars and prepared to give me to his gods. "To Gophanon!" he had shouted, and my mother screamed as she was raped, and I screamed because I knew I was going to die. "To Clelor!" Tanabur shouted. "To Cernunius! To Taranis! To Socelos! To Bel!" And on that last great name, he had hurled me down onto the killing stake. And he had missed. My mother had been screaming, and I still heard her screams as I kicked my way through Tanabur's circle of skulls, and her screams melded into the druid's shriek as I echoed his long-ago cry of death. "To Bel!" I shouted. Howlbane cut down, and I did not miss. Howlbane cut Tanabers down through the shoulder, down through the ribs, and such was the sheer blood-sodden anger in my soul that Howlbane cut on down through his scrawny belly and deep into his stinking bowels, so that his body burst apart like a rotted corpse, and all the time I screamed the awful scream of a little child being given to the death pit. The skull circle filled with blood, and my eyes with tears as I looked up at the king who had slain Rala's child and Mordred's mother, the king who had raped Nimue and taken her eye, and, remembering that pain, I took Howlbane's hilt in both my hands and wrenched the blade free of the dirty offal at my feet, and stepped across the druid's body to carry death to Gundlius. "He's mine!" Nimue shouted at me. She had taken off her eye patch so that her empty socket leered red in the flamelight. She walked past me, smiling. "You're mine," she crooned. "All mine." And Gundlius screamed. And perhaps, in the other world, Norwenna heard that scream, and knew that her son, her little winter-born son, was still the king.